Welcome to the ReGen Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined with my co-host, AC. Let's dive in.
On this episode, we have Tim Richards, who is the founder and CEO at Philosopher Foods. Philosopher Foods is supporting regenerative agriculture through their regenerative organic nut butter products. In this episode, we learn about Philosopher's origin story, their mission to transform food production from degenerative monocultures to regenerative polycultures, and all the ins and outs of building a ReGen brand in the nut butter category of CPG. Tim did not name his company Philosopher Foods by accident, y'all, as he considers himself a philosopher after studying it in undergrad, and he showed up to our conversation with tons of great data that makes a compelling case for regenerative almond production over its conventional counterpart. We go deep in the show on these resources and also have them linked in the show notes, so check them out. So without further ado, let's talk some almonds and get to the episode. Here we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the ReGen Brands podcast. We are fired up to have Tim from Philosopher Foods here with us today. Philosopher Foods is bringing the first regenerative organic nut butters and some other items to market. So pumped to have Tim here to share with us. Welcome, Tim.
Hey guys, thanks for doing this. I've been appreciating the podcast, and thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're really excited to dive into nut butters. We know there's a lot of misconceptions out there around, how people produce nuts. So we're excited to hear from you and understand, what Philosopher Foods is doing differently. But before we dive into sort of like the regenerative supply chain, tee us up, for those who are unfamiliar with the brand, what do you make and where can you be purchased today?
Totally. Yeah. So Philosopher Foods, we make a line of craft nut butters. And so we're basically doing small batch, stone ground coconut butter, sprouted almond butter, and different flavors and textures of each, including chocolate almond butter and chocolate coconut butter. I think our big differentiator that we really are trying to introduce to the category is this concept of craft, right? We're very familiar with the difference between Wonder Bread and your local artisanal sourdough, or Coors Light and your local craft beer, or Hershey's and your Dick Taylor craft chocolate bar. So we're trying to introduce that same distinction to the nut butter category. And when you do the stone grinding that we're doing, it really creates an extreme quantum leap difference, like I just described in those other categories. So we're excited about bringing this innovation. It's really not innovation. It's really going back to the way we used to do things, but it's innovation within the current market context.
Love that, man. It's funny how much not just the growing processes, but the processing is coming up in all these conversations. So we'll dive more into that later, but just, share kind of origin story, your story, why nut butter, why Philosopher Foods, what's the origin story, Tim?
Totally. Well, let's see where to begin. Really where this started, I was 25 years old. I was trying to figure out, what am I here to do on this planet? How do I achieve a meaningful way of working in the world that actually allows me to achieve my mission and vision and my values, and also make money? And so I'm studying to be a holistic health coach. I'm thinking I might go in that path, kind of help people become healthier. Because my background, I grew up 25 years on the standard American diet, 18 years, and got to college and kind of learned about how messed up that was and on so many different levels. And I also had a bunch of health problems. I had acne, I was overweight, I was depressed, I had a lot of gut issues, and had no idea what was going on. Got to college, learned about all that, changed my diet, and I felt fantastic. Cleared up the acne, lost a bunch of weight.
What was it in college? Was it a particular course or just a different group of peers? When I think of going to college, I didn't learn a damn thing about food. So I'm curious to know what exposure in college led to some of those revelations. Totally.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in central Maryland, so it's a very conservative area. There's actually a lot of racism. It was pretty rural. We had a local KKK chapter. I was very anti all of that, and I was get me out of here. I want to change the world for the better. I'm sick of all this stuff. So I basically sought out the most progressive college I could go to. I went to Haverford College, Philly suburbs, and a small liberal arts school, social justice focused, founded by Quakers. And when I got there, it was super. I was all of a sudden I was at home. It was really intellectual, really thoughtful, kind-hearted people, all trying to make the world better. And so I basically just joined every single activist group that I could. I was like, literally, I was in like animal rights group, anti-war group, labor group, environmental group, like you name it. I was like really testing the waters on activism.
I'm
And
imagining like a Letterman's jacket, just with all like the activism patches down the side. Like such a cool concept.
totally.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, man, I just dove deep. And one of the things that got me was I watched some, factory farm documentary, and I was like, oh man, that's crazy messed up. This industrial food system isn't working for anybody. And accidentally during my freshman week of college, I accidentally was vegetarian for a week, and like it was a total accident. I didn't even think about it, but then I started feeling really good. I was like, oh man, I don't know what's going on here, and I started experimenting with it, and I was just feeling like a lot better, like a lot lighter, a lot clearer, and so I kind of experimented with the vegetarian diet a little bit, the vegan diet. I actually went down the raw food diet rabbit hole for a little bit.
Wow.
And, because I had been so overloaded with chemicals, poisons, preservatives, sweeteners, additives, you name it, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, burgers, all of it.
Yep.
Every change in diet that I made, it had an extreme change on my quality of consciousness, the way that I think, felt, saw. Like literally, it was like food was changing my whole consciousness, and so I was just I couldn't believe it. And
Yeah.
and so yeah, learning and in each little shift that I would make, I would notice differences in how I felt, and that was just so profound to me. So that's how I got super deep into changing my diet in college, and also I switched from conventional to organic foods, which was a whole leap in my health as well.
Yeah.
And I just kind of went down the rabbit hole from there. I got super into environmental issues. I ended up focusing on, I majored in philosophy, and I ended up doing a thesis on environmental ethics. And essentially, it's funny, my thesis was that, humans basically need a second industrial revolution to be more ecological. And I studied Aldo Leopold's
Amen
land
to
ethic.
that.
Yeah. I studied the land ethic of Aldo Leopold, which basically says a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, and it's wrong when it tends otherwise. So I really interpreted that deeply. I was like, wait a second.
Wow.
I don't think this guy is actually talking about like morally right and wrong necessarily. I think he's actually talking about ecologically and biologically beneficial and detrimental.
Yep.
And so I got super tuned into all these concepts. So fast forward about 4 years, from 3 or 4 years, graduated, 25 years old, trying to figure out what to do, all this stuff under my belt, studying to be a holistic health coach, doing organic food product demos for Harmless Harvest, Eco Teas, Alive and Radiant Foods,
Hey.
just like drinking the Kool-Aid in every way.
Yeah.
This is the induction into CPG.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was studying to be a holistic health coach. I learned about sprouting, and basically they told me, hey, sprouting, it helps you process grains, beans, nuts, and seeds to make them sweeter, more digestible, and more nutritious. I was like, cool. Actually, I remember I did that back in college. Like I was doing that with almonds, making my almond milk, like buckwheat breads, like all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wait a second. I remember that. That was really good. I should do that again. So I sprouted some almonds, and man, I was like, oh, these are just the best almonds I've ever had in my life. And I was like, wait a second, this will make a really good almond butter. Ground it into almond butter. Absolutely delicious, crazy good almond butter.
Yeah.
And I just started like making it for myself, my housemates. I live with 7 other people in this like vegetarian solar powered cooperative in Davis, California.
Wow. So awesome.
Yeah, and they were just like, dude, this is the best almond butter ever. Like, you got to make this a business. Oh my God, blah, 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 blah. I was like, yeah, we'll see. I'm trying to be a health coach. I might be a naturopath. We'll see how it all goes.
Yeah.
One day, my housemate came up to me, literally shoves cash in my hand. He's like, dude, I want to buy your almond butter.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wait.
That was a light bulb moment. I was like, maybe I should turn this into a business.
Yeah, maybe it's worth something.
Totally. And then he was like, do you want to see more clients or sell more jars of almond butter? And I was like, interesting.
And what year is this? Where are we in the arc of like compared to today? Is this 2 years ago?
Yeah,
Year ago?
this is a decade ago.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, this is 2012 in the fall. And so I was, come 2013, I went to this little talk at UC Davis about the Cottage Food Law. And it was this
Mm.
new law that had passed in January of 2013 that made it legal for you to sell food that you make in your home kitchen. And I was like, wait a second,
Wow.
I could actually, I could actually start this business for like $150, and
Yeah.
I have everything I need to do it. I could do it right here in my kitchen. And I talked to some other housemates about it, and they had different things that they wanted to try too. One housemate wanted to do rice cakes, another wanted to do gluten-free pancakes. We're like, shoot, let's just get the certification and go for it. So we
Yeah.
did. We like became the first certified cottage food operation in Yolo County, and
Wow.
Love it.
it's like these hippies in a co-op, and like we had like a 4-day extended work party to try to get this kitchen ready to be inspected by the county.
Yeah.
You
That's
can
awesome.
imagine just like all these bulk bins and just craziness, like years of dirt and grunge. Like,
Yeah.
You mentioned stone ground, and I can't help but picture you with like a giant mortar and pestle with like almonds, and just like grinding this
Yeah.
thing like in your home kitchen, like you said. So like, what did the actual production look like at that stage of the business?
in the very beginning, I was doing it in a Vitamix because I
Okay.
Mm.
didn't really know about stone grinding yet. And it was actually
Mhm.
an almond farmer that I was purchasing from that first taught me about stone grinding. He's like, "Hey, try my
Mm.
almond butter." And I was like, "Whoa, this is
Mhm.
crazy good texture. Super silky smooth. You can actually pour it. You can drink it if you want to. It's just like unlike any other texture. It doesn't stick to the roof of your mouth. It's just like a world apart from conventionally mass-produced almond butter."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh man, that's how I want to process it for sure. That's so much better." I mean,
So
the
when you say
Vitamix
conventionally mass produced, hold on, sorry to keep interrupting, but how is mass produced almond butter made? I have no idea, and I consume almond butter all the time. I'd love to learn this.
totally, yeah. So basically, it's going the almonds go in one end of the machine, and it goes for this high-powered, high-speed like metal cutting machine. You got these blades chopping it, and you're like just like literally pulverizing it, pushing it through one end out the other, thousands of pounds an hour, and you know it's a lot of processing. It can definitely heat up the almonds in that process.
Mhm.
Some people say, yeah. Anyways, I won't speculate, but um, it's just it doesn't give the almonds enough time to actually release all of their oils fully and properly.
Mm.
And so when you see that separation in the jar where it's like you got an inch
Mm.
of like almond oil on top and you have to like
Mhm.
knife it for 30 minutes to try to integrate it and like
It's so annoying.
you
It
know
spills all over the side, and it's like this
And
dense oil that
what
gets everywhere.
when
yeah,
I eat that, like literally when I eat that or I eat like a conventional almond in like a trail mix package, like versus a product like yours, like I will get a stomach ache every
hmm
single time. Versus
hmm
when I had your guys' products at Expo West, like I had like 7 jars, like straight almond butter and like no issues.
nice.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's I mean that's feedback we get a lot. A lot of people they can't do nuts for whatever reason, but they try ours and they can do it. Or some people are even allergic to almonds and they can't do
Hmm.
almond butter. They try ours, they can. So,
Hmm.
the sprouting, it needs a lot more research to understand what exactly is going on there. We know for
Yeah.
sure that it's increasing the polyphenol count when you sprout it. And so those are,
Hmm.
important phytochemicals that are anti-inflammatory, and a lot of them are anti-cancer, anti-degenerative
Hmm.
diseases of various sorts. Um, so that's one big piece of it. Also, by sprouting it, we're basically activating the life processes of the almonds. So some of the enzymes start to break down some of the anti-nutrients. So, for example, phytase is activated. Phytase basically is designed to break down phytic acid. Phytic
Hmm.
acid, all it does is hold phosphorus inside the seed until the seed's ready to grow. So when you
Hmm.
activate the phytase, it breaks down the phytic acid, it releases the phosphorus, the seed starts to grow. And so you're basically pressing go on the life processes within the almond, and it starts to
Mm.
chemically change the almond to make it sweeter, more digestible, and more nutritious.
Love it.
Wow. So I just want to touch on a topic you just sort of mentioned, and this has been one of those recurring themes that we keep having on the podcast, and it's the difference between the way you are processing food and the way others process food,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
correlation between the proliferation of food allergies these days. Like, is it really food
Mm.
allergies, or is it the way that we're processing food that people are
Mm.
becoming allergic to? It's just an interesting concept, and this is pure speculation. You mentioned before, Tim, you weren't going to speculate. I'm going to go there. I have no data at all to support that claim, but it's just an interesting concept to think that like maybe people
Yeah.
aren't actually allergic to almonds or peanuts or whatever else, dairy, for
Hmm.
example. Maybe it's the way we're processing foods in mass industrial quantities, right?
hmm
So there's
There's
been
there's a lot of research around that in wheat actually, like when they moved from
Hmm.
stone grinding the whole thing to like separating it and then metal grinding it. some people
Hmm.
think that had to do with a lot of the allergy uptick and stuff. And of course, the other element is glyphosate, which we can get into later.
Hmm.
But
Right.
I think that's definitely at play too. But yeah, as far as stone grinding, we have a 30,000 plus year species history of processing food through stone grinding. They found it at
Mm.
archaeological sites. People were doing it with a donkey, just walking a donkey around in a circle, pulling stones and crushing whatever crop it was.
Love
Um,
that.
it's like that's a very time tested, tried and true method of food processing compared to all these newfangled things that we're doing that we may not know
Hmm.
the effects of yet.
Another theme that's coming up in every single conversation, it feels like, and Kyle and I, if you listen to episode 0, it's why we started the podcast, was like this whole human health connection, right?
Hmm.
And so it's so funny to hear you say the naturopathic thing and the health journey. Kyle has his story with cancer. I have my story with my autoimmune disease, and working with naturopathic doctors. I thought about being a naturopath and like a health coach. So that's just hilarious in itself. But so many people, the positive of the current human health issues we're having is that so many people are turning it into a positive of trying to work in food and help make this connection of human health and food and then change the food system for the better. So I just love that and wanted to pull that out. So you start in the home kitchen, and how do we get from there to today?
Well, yeah, basically, I got a bunch of orders that came in. I
Mm-hmm.
announced I launched formally on Earth Day, and so I basically kind of put out an email to a bunch of local listers. I was like, "Hey, selling the
Yeah.
sprouted almond butter. Hey, it's organic. Hey, we're trying to become." At the time, so my the last piece that I forgot in the story was I basically one night after about 9 months of meditating on how am I going to make this life work thing happen. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the answer came through. I was just kind of like laying on my yoga mat before bed, meditating,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden I got this download, and it was just like, your life's purpose right now is to start a sprouted almond butter company to teach people about the importance of sprouted food, and then change the
Yes.
way that food is grown and made from being degenerative polycultures to regenerative polycultures. Boom.
Mm.
And I was just like, oh,
Mm.
whoa. And I just got like tingles in my whole body. And it was like, that's
Mm-hmm.
it. This is how I tie all these things together, being a thinker, a foodie,
Yeah.
an activist, a health coach. This is like the way that I tie everything together into a cohesive whole that's an offering that'll actually enable me to not only achieve my mission, but also make money doing it.
Mm.
So it all just kind of
Incredible.
coalesced in this moment, and I just boom, there it is. And I had this whole like 3 hour vision where I could pretty much see like the next 5 years of my life, everything unfolding, like all these different
Wow.
pieces. I could feel it, I could see it, I could like it was really awesome.
Yeah.
So I kind of I got what I describe as like the marching orders on how to do it all, and then the
Mm.
next day I just started doing it, and then that was over 9 years ago.
So direct to consumer, farmers market. I
Yeah, that's
mean, I'm
how it
sure that's where you
started.
started.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
what was the first break into actual CPG getting into retail?
Um, I believe the first store that we got into was actually Rainbow Grocery in San
Mm.
Francisco. They
Hmm.
they took a big gamble on us because we were still, it said made in a certified solar powered home kitchen in Davis,
And
That
was
is
that handwritten on the
awesome.
label or was it a
Some
sticker?
people
uh,
probably love that, actually.
we had our old tree label at that point.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
know if you guys seen our old branding, but
Yeah.
we did get that in time, luckily.
Wow.
But yeah, it still had like an Avery like paper craft label on the lid with a QR code, little tree talking about permaculture. That was the word for regenerative at the time. Was I was trying
Mm.
to create permaculture orchards for our supply
Hmm.
chain.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that was the first account. We got into Davis Food Co-op. We got into farmers markets in the region, and just started building it out from there. We actually didn't launch D2C on our website until 2016, unfortunately. Um,
Wow.
it could have done better by launching sooner, but we just didn't get to it.
Yeah.
So fast forward to today. What's the split look like in terms of business on DTC versus business in retail? And where else are you sold today?
Yeah, last year it was about 22% D2C compared to all the other channels. We're also sold on Thrive Market online, sold on
Mm-hmm.
Patagonia Provisions. We're sold on Amazon Prime. We're sold on Good Eggs, KP Organic Farm Fresh to You on the West Coast. So that's pretty much the e-tail side of the business, which is more or less 50% of the business, and then the rest of the
Mm.
business is brick and mortar. Um, we do direct brick and mortar, we do fair brick and mortar, we do
Mm.
UNFI brick and mortar, and we also do farmers markets. that was still about 7% of our revenue last year. So
Wow.
Yeah, it's really important to us to diversify our income streams in the industry so we don't get a monoculture of sales channels.
Yep.
Got to be
Absolutely.
regenerative on farm and regenerative in your business. I love it.
That's right.
Who have been some retailers that have really supported y'all that you really think have got behind this whole regenerative, movement, Tim?
Jimbo's, I put at the top. Jimbo's,
Mm-hmm.
they have this whole soil label now. And
Mm-hmm.
so they had this intake form. We filled out what we did that was regenerative, how, blah, blah, blah. And,
Mm-hmm.
they came to our booth at Expo. They did a whole interview of us. They put it up on their website later.
Wow.
They're putting the soil tag on our products on shelf in the store.
Yeah.
They're just super awesome. They get it. They're doing the right
Shout
stuff.
out to Jimbo's, man. It's come up, what, 5 or 6 times if
For
this is
sure.
episode 10?
At least half the episodes come up. They're the first Regen Coalition partner. Yeah, they do
Hell
it right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Love that. That's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. So
Yeah.
let's talk Regen Organic Almonds, right?
Cool.
And I know you might be expanding past that here soon, but we really want to give the listener a real understanding of how different these systems are from a pure production standpoint. We've talked a little bit about the processing side, then conventional almonds. And I think we want to tie in kind of the understanding for the consumer of, I don't know, you probably know the exact number. The vast majority of almonds in the world are grown in California. And for us to sustain that, we have to make this transition to more regenerative practices because we're having some really intense chemical and water issues with that crop that I know you're very bullish can be kind of prevented with Regen Organic practices. So I'll give the mic over to you with all that.
Totally. Yeah, I wish we had a screen share on here. I would show you our parable of 3 orchards slide. And basically, imagine instead of our 3 faces here, you see on your left, you'll see a monoculture of almond trees with bare soil, nothing else growing in between it. Literally, that's all you see. Middle slide, you see trees and green grass. That's organic. And then on the right side, you see trees, a variety of green species growing between those trees, and you see sheep grazing in between those trees. And so, this is kind of my 3 pictures tells 3,000 words slide progression. So basically, the situation is conventional almonds are 99% of California's almond crop. It's the largest plant-based agricultural commodity in California that's legal. It's a $5.6 billion
industry. Which insinuates there's something illegal that might be more.
Say that last one again because our laughter overshot it, but that was hilarious.
Yeah, almonds are a $5.6 billion industry.
Wow.
And so the only agriculture industry bigger than it in the state is dairy. So yeah, it's
a huge deal. I mean, this is a huge deal.
Yeah, it's over 1 million acres that look like that picture on the left with the barren conventional. It's the most heavily sprayed crop in the state. There's over 40 million pounds of herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and fumigants sprayed on it every single year, according to data publicly available by the state.
So that means it's probably more.
Oh yeah,
in reality.
Yeah, and they only give you the names of the top 5 most heavily sprayed ones. But there's all kinds of crazy cocktails that they're doing because they're finding that there's pest resistance to glyphosate, for example. So they need to add 3 other compounds in the glyphosate,
right?
And then it just creates this toxic compound that's killing the bees, and it's just sad. It's a lot of sad gloom and doom kind of data. And so, the data also shows, scientifically speaking, that in the conventional system, you're averaging 3.2 gallons of water per almond when you farm in this way. And
insane.
It's insane.
That is so much water for one almond.
I'm just picturing one almond
3 gallons?
3.2 gallons. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's a wild visual.
Yeah, that's an average too. It can be more, can be less. And it kind of depends on where you are, what the soil's like, that kind of stuff, management practice details. But also, the other thing to note is that those almonds, they're also, so a lot of the places that they're growing the almonds, they're not necessarily having any natural rainfall that would be enough to support almonds. And so when you're farming conventionally, you're basically disrupting the soil biology, and then it's not able to form those soil organic matter aggregate structures that would store water, store carbon, etc. So my theory is that Almonds, yes, they currently have a water problem, but the source of the water problem is the chemical use. And if we stop using all those inputs, we could actually give the soil biology a chance to live, a chance to do its thing. And we know for a fact that for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, we can store an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre. So the more soil life we have in the soil, the less water that we need. And so that's the argument to first moving to organic to start building, stop the disruption, and then moving to regenerative to start rebuilding and aggregating even faster than nature can do it.
So I want to hone in on this message real quick, just to reiterate. That's a lot of information at one time. So for our listeners, essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is my interpretation of what you said, is because of conventional farming practices, they've destroyed the living structures like the soil biology that can help to maintain the water levels in the soil, which is part of what's driving the overuse of water in conventional almond agriculture. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying that once we switch to organic and or regenerative, we can start to build that soil biology to increase the water retention rates in the soil and reduce the amount of water needed to grow that one almond.
That's correct.
Got it.
So, what? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the Ecdysis Foundation, Jonathan Lundgren has been doing a lot of great work to quantify this in almonds particularly. And he's, I can give you guys the links for the show notes to their peer-reviewed studies on the differences between conventional conventional and regenerative almond systems, and it's just profound. I mean, the difference biologically and ecologically is insane. There's like 6x more insect diversity. There's like so much more soil organic matter, so much more soil carbon, so much it just goes on and on. Like the biological and ecological benefits are insane. The nutrient density. So his methods of measuring it, I don't think are the most advanced. And I'm actually going to be partnering with the Bionutrient Food Association as well as the Utah State University to start quantifying the differences between conventional, organic, and regeneratively grown almonds.
Incredible.
To really dive deep on the nutrient density, because most of what Jonathan was studying in that study was more like macronutrition, stuff that you find in the nutritional facts panel. And so he did find that there was a lot more magnesium in the almonds that are regenerative compared to conventional. So that's super important because a ton of Americans, like 80%, are magnesium deficient. Super important, element that we're lacking. But yeah, so the fact is, like, those nutritional facts panels contain maybe like 12 different compounds. And the USDA actually tracks like over 130 different compounds in food. And there's been published scientific research on over 100,000 different compounds in food. And Dan from Bionutrient, he actually estimates that there's over 10 million different compounds in food. And so science only knows about 1% of the compounds that are in food. And so a big part of our mission, Philosopher Foods, our slogan is Know Thy Foods. Because if you are what you eat, which I think a good case can be made for that. I mean, you might modify to say we are what we absorb, or we are what your food ate. I don't know if you guys know this book, but big plug to David Montgomery. This book is epic. Everyone in regeneration needs to read it. Over 1,000 peer-reviewed studis that
for those who are only listening, the book is called What Your Food Ate
by David Montgomery and Anna Bilk. Over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies on all the ways in which regenerative is really the best way to grow food. Hands down.
There's so many parallels between how we grow the food and how we grow our bodies. And if you think about the three images of the orchards, it's like the first orchard is you're in the hospital, hooked up to IVs, getting pumped with this, that, and the other thing, and you're living off, some sort of fake synthetic input, right? And it's the same thing with the growing operations. And on the third one, you have a multi-species of grasses and other green cover. You have the animal integration. You have, the less needs for water and the greater water infiltration and the no chemicals. And so it's just so profound to me. And to me, that has been super important to try and bring more people into the conversation. Is one, for them to understand the human health component of not just the chemical free, but of the nutrient density. And two, how people are actually doing it and getting people to the farms. Because once you see that, real live and in color, picture says 1,000 words, but when you're standing there or when you can stand there and you can see the difference between the two, it's just, you can't unsee that. And that's what was like the final click for me. Once I saw a handful of regenerative farms, I was like, okay, I'm going to work on this till the day I die.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Amen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really curious, every time we talk to a brand who's doing something regenerative, it's like, man, why isn't everybody doing this? Like,
Mm,
why can't everybody just do this? So I'm curious from your perspective, because you are way closer to the ground than this than we are. I assume economics are the primary barrier. But
100%.
in your
Yep.
opinion, so talk to us about why it's more difficult to do this regeneratively and what you think it would take to get the
mm,
99% of almond orchards in California to start to implement some of these practices.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So to start with, yes, economics is number one, the most biggest barrier to scaling not only regenerative agriculture but also a craft product. Um,
mm,
we're constantly getting the price point objection, and
mm,
we are one of the most expensive products per ounce on the shelf, no
mm,
doubt. Um, but in my view, it's like, yeah, and we got to figure out a way to get. I don't know if we're going to be able to change the economic system to value nutrient density or to value, soil carbon sequestration or to value water conservation or to value insect biodiversity or health. I don't know if we can get that. Like right now, it's just not measuring any of that. It's like,
yeah.
nope,
Right.
this is cheaper, this is more
Yeah.
expensive, and
Mm-hmm,
whatever is cheaper is better, and the
mm-hmm,
market's going to choose that because it's better. And it's like, well, if this is really a self-interested market, I would think that a consumer would want to choose the food that was the best for them. Like I was
mm-hmm,
saying, if you are to eat, then to be your best self, you got to have your best food. So in order to get the best food, you got to do all these regenerative practices, you got to do all these craft processing techniques, and that's all more expensive. And
mm-hmm,
so instead of like decrying that as, oh, it's more expensive, I would actually say the self-interested consumer should want to spend the most money that they possibly can on their
mm-hmm,
food and on their farm products, because if they are not getting the best food, and therefore they are not being their best selves.
mm-hmm,
So it's just a minor flip of the paradigm to see it as an investment rather than a liability that it's more expensive.
mm-hmm.
Personally, I only spend money on the top dollar food because I know those differences.
Yeah.
And, for that reason, that's one of the only things I spend money on. But,
Mm-hmm,
so what we're trying to do with Dan at Bionutrient is, okay, this is the economic system we find ourselves in. How do we quantify not only the price per ounce, but also
mm-hmm,
the nutrients per ounce,
mm-hmm.
the anti-nutrients per ounce,
Yeah.
the toxins per ounce, the agricultural chemicals per ounce, the carbon sequestered or emitted per
Yeah.
ounce, the
Yeah.
water used per ounce. And so I want to create what I'm calling the true nutrition facts. And
Mm,
I want a holistic sense of what's in my food. I want to
mm,
know a lot more about my food because that's
yeah.
the most critical thing to life.
Right.
So that's really what I'm trying to do with my brand and with my products is create a platform to scale regenerative agriculture on the back end, but also to scale craft processing in the manufacturing end, and then on the
Mm-hmm,
consumer end to create an unparalleled platform for transparency to quantify why all that is so much
mm-hmm.
better for all of life on Earth.
Yeah. I, when you speak to that, I couldn't agree more with the consumer piece, Tim. But when I think about the production, the magic bullet there, the silver bullet there is how do we get producers to do all the things we just talked about
Mm,
cheap, right? Or in a
mm,
cheaper way so that your supply is cheaper so that you don't have to be as high price, right? Because
yeah.
it just makes the product more accessible.
Yep.
Um, and I think when you look at our economy from a macro perspective, it's built on consumption
Mm,
of mass produced cheap goods.
mm-hmm,
So there will always be conscious consumers and that will continue to grow. And there'll always be a place for premium markets and the things that you're doing. But I want to flip it back to you on, you've obviously talked to these producers. You've seen the practices that need to be implemented. How do we implement them cheaper? How do we, is it government grants? Is it technology? What is that, do you think, from an almond perspective?
Yeah, I think in almonds, well, a really important factor is the water, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you're pumping the aquifers dry, which is what's happening in a lot of these different growing
Yeah.
regions, San Joaquin Valley in California, the northern end has, more water that naturally replenishes. But as you get into the central and southern ends, these farmers are drilling 2,500 plus foot wells. I mean,
Mm,
they're just poking straws deeper and deeper, millions of dollars in well drilling. They're buying their
mm,
own rigs because there's so much demand for drilling. and they can't wait. They got to get more water.
Wow.
They got to get more water more quickly. So they're buying their own
Wow.
rigs to drill.
Wow.
And I'm talking about the billionaire growers. I'm talking about the
Hmm.
Resnicks of the world. And if you want to hear a deep dive in all this, you've got to listen to Mark Arax's book, The Dreamt Land. He goes deep on the hydrology of California from indigenous times to present. And there's no better history that I've ever heard of water issues in California. And so one
Wow.
of the things that he points out is there's this issue of subsidence, which is the deeper that you poke your straw and the more water you suck out, the land actually drops. Like you can measure how
Mm.
much the land is dropping in these regions. And in some places, the land has dropped more than 60 feet in the past, like
Wow.
couple dozen years.
Whoa.
And so as the land is sinking, you're literally all this, like your telephone poles are starting to warp, your like
Hmm.
wellheads are starting to get exposed, your roads are starting to crinkle and crack, like the whole area is just getting destroyed, and it's like millions of dollars in damage.
Hmm.
But this is an externality. This isn't like
Yeah.
calculated in the cost of a conventional almond.
Hmm.
But my long story short, when the water runs out, they can't do it this way in these places anymore. And so, the water's getting more and more expensive. And so,
Hmm.
they need to either figure out how to use less, or they're not going to be able to do it, or it's going to run out.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
other thing is like the chemical inputs. The What Your Food Ate book, a lot of the studies are showing that these are completely unnecessary and in fact counterproductive.
Mm.
So if we don't need to spend money on these chemical inputs, because what they do is they wipe out the beneficials as well. And
Yeah.
so when you wipe out the beneficial predators, then there's no natural competition. And so once you spray once, you actually need to spray more and more and more, because
Yep.
you don't have the beneficials are slower to recover than the other, problem species. And
Hmm.
so it's just a vicious cycle that if you just stop doing it and start introducing beneficials, you save a ton of money. You don't need to buy all
Hmm.
these chemicals.
Hmm.
Um, and then I think the other piece for economics is the research that Jonathan Lundgren did. He actually found that the regenerative orchards were 2x more profitable.
Hmm.
And so when you're growing in this way, your products can basically fetch a premium of double in the marketplace. So you're saving money on inputs. You're saving expensive resources like water, needing
Yeah.
less of them, and you're actually getting more money at the end because of all this.
And 2x doesn't sound like a big number in agriculture. That is humongous.
Hmm.
Profitability, two times more profitable. That is humongous in agriculture.
Yep, exactly.
It's crazy. What one of the things that really strikes me is the put a band-aid on a bruise situation, which it
Mm.
sounds like that's what you're describing with the desire to find more water in California. Like if they were
Yeah.
to instead invest those dollars into incorporating some of these regenerative principles to make them less water dependent, long term
Hmm.
that's a huge investment. But I guess in the short term, they're just trying to figure out how do I maintain the crop that I've already put in the ground this year? How do I
Yep.
not lose what I have? So it's like the dichotomy between like the quick solution is going to create a much larger problem 3, 5, 10 years out, 20, 40, 60, 100 years out, versus
Yeah.
like if they could just bite the bullet now, start to implement some of these practices, maybe have a tough harvest or two, and then become more sustainable and more profitable, like you mentioned. Like it could work,
Hmm.
but it's as somebody who's never farmed, I really don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just taking these theories and trying to implement them into my own knowledge. um, Sounds really easy to do, but I could imagine that being like a tough decision for somebody to have to make.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And that it look what Tim just articulated about the land literally sinking and all the externalities that are affecting the larger community. Like once again, consumer demand is huge, but individual actors are going to act selfishly because that's human nature. And farmers are going to do what they need to do to make money. So no finger wagging, no finger pointing at them. So like it's got to be coordinated. It's got to be farmers. It's got to be governments. It's got to be individual agribusinesses. It's got to be people coming together and saying, okay, we know XYZ is happening, and then it's causing this. So how do we build a suite of financial, cultural, technical assistance, all these solutions together to kind of give to people, as a unit. Um, so Tim, we talked a lot about the region supply chains, tons of great information. I learned a ton. That was awesome. Um, how have you capitalized the business today? Let's go back kind of to your business, how it's grown. How have you funded it? It sounds like early on it wasn't a lot of money, but I'm sure that's changed as you've grown and scaled. So just talk to us about growth and fundraising history.
Totally. Yeah. So back in 2013, got a little loan from my parents to kind of get the thing going, buy a stone
Hmm.
grinder that was big enough. Um,
Nice.
started at the 2 pound level, literally 2 pounds at a time in the stone grinder. And I was like, all right, mom and dad, can you help me buy one that'll grind 100 pounds? And they're like,
Yeah,
sure.
love that.
So that, a lot of family support has enabled me to get going. Um, I also, in later years, I did the first external fundraising was through Kiva Zip. It's a 0% interest crowdfunded loan platform. So I've
Cool.
done several 0% interest loans through them. Um, I've in more recent history, I've gotten involved with the slow money community here in Northern
Yeah.
California. They've done some low interest loans to me. So we've also gotten, the SBA loan, EIDL, the PPP during COVID. We got a loan from Pacific Community Ventures. So it's been a lot of debt. I'd
A
say
lot of debt.
it's been basically exclusively debt until
Yeah.
literally the end of last year. We started a convertible note raise.
Hmm.
Um, so that's, we've been financing through that convertible note raise for the last 8.5 months or so.
Hmm.
And currently, we're about to launch a WeFunder campaign as well.
Nice.
So, by the time this goes live, hopefully it will be live. We're going to start testing the waters this Saturday. And yeah, we're going to announce it at the Slow Money Farm Fest on Sunday and just go off to the races and try to get as much convertible note raise as we can through the crowd to kind of supplement our private raise.
Love it. If you're listening and you care about any of the stuff we've been talking about, definitely check that out, and we'll try and include the link maybe in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. And then I'm curious, what are your plans with this upcoming raise? What are you hoping to use that money for? Is that, for a big production run? Are you hoping to invest in more equipment? Are you trying to make a big raw ingredient purchase, focus on marketing, hires? What's the goal?
All of the above.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we're trying to really get the money that we need to scale it at this point. It's been pretty organic, pretty slow growth so far through time,
Hmm.
and to really do it right, we just need more capital to play in this industry. As you guys know, it's super expensive. Um,
Hmm.
the people that are really crushing it in our category are people that have a ton of money to spend on
Hmm.
marketing. Because believe me, what's in the side of the jar is not that good. But what the way they wrap it, the way they talk about it, the way they digitally market, it's sleek, it's
Yep.
sexy, it's hitting all the buttons for what they think, what the consumers want, or at least what they
Hmm.
think they want. And we have real substance. We've got real content inside the jar. There's all these holistic value adds, but we haven't
Hmm.
had the budget to really do the marketing to tell people about everything that we talked about in this podcast.
Hmm.
So yeah, we need to get on a more of a leveling. It's never going to be a level playing field in the food
Yeah.
industry, but we need to power up to play more strongly in the space, and that's what
Yeah.
the funding's really about.
People that have a good business background, I think they understand, it costs money to make money, but I don't think mainly people, and I want to touch on it for a second, just CPG is so capital intensive, right? So like you go celebrate a big retail win and you get into 100 new doors and you got to pay for that. You got to pay to open up the DC. You probably got to pay KE and Unify. Then you might have to pay the retailer slotting fees. And then you got to make sure you can actually market geo-targeted in that area on shelf, socially, digitally, whatever, so that people actually buy the product once it's on the shelf, let alone make sure it gets on the product right, in the right spot, looking good, tasting good, if it's a refrigerated supply chain, you got all these things. And so, just kudos to you all for fighting that fight, because I think that's the hardest thing from the early stage brands that I've worked with. It's just a cash burn that is unavoidable. It's just the price of doing business in this space.
Exactly. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for saying that, because yeah, it's really hard to explain. Like, luckily, before we really started burning, we got the
Hmm.
loans before we really started burning to grow.
Hmm. Hmm.
But now, if we try to go to lender, they'd be like, "Heck no, are you kidding me?"
Hmm.
Like it's like, well, we've been investing in the business, and they're like, "But you're losing money," and it's like, well, that's the
Hmm.
territory.
Hmm.
So yeah, thank you for saying that.
And I'd love to see maybe this is happening. You guys have a little more insight directly into this world, but like we talk about Jimbos, and I think what they're doing awesome. I know Thrive Market's really doing great things to support Erewhon, some others. I would love to see retailers and distributors give some cash incentives for this stuff, because what they want to do is they want to get the product, they want to market it and throw out some cool pamphlet about we support regenerative ag. But it's like, if you really want to support the brands, like, take the $5,000 slotting fee away, or give them a free ad week, or like something like that. And I think there's a huge opportunity for someone to really lead the charge from that standpoint.
Oh yeah, or like the free fill case. Like instead of us paying for you to take our product, which is that's actually what a free fill is. It's not just giving it away. It's actually paying the distributor to give it away for you. It's like, instead of doing that, what if you guys, invested in ReGen brands? Like I'd like to publicly invite like Sprouts, for example, to like they're talking a lot about ReGen ag, and we're ReGen nut butter, but they recently declined us. And I'm like, well, there's no space on your shelf for the only regenerative nut butter, but you like regenerative ag? Like,
come on, Sprouts.
What am I missing? And like, same with natural grocers. It's like, oh, they just did this big initiative with starting to ban glyphosate. And I'm like, yes, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for like raising consumer consciousness about this massive issue, right? Glyphosate, carcinogenic herbicide that is in Roundup. It's the most heavily sprayed herbicide on the planet. It's antibiotic, so it's killing our gut biomes. It causes, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. It's just like all these things. 81% of Americans don't even know what glyphosate is. And guess what? 80% of Americans are testing for it in their body. It's like, okay, there's a lot wrong here. But so we got natural grocers coming out and being like, check it out. We're not taking any more oats or any more lentils that have glyphosate levels above 10 parts per billion. And I'm like, yes, you guys, thank you. And let's apply that to every single food product, because guess what? It's not just oats and lentils. I have data. I've done the testing on my brand versus other organic brands versus conventional brands. Every single organic brand tested below that 10 part per billion threshold for glyphosate. Every single conventional brand tested above. And so let's apply it systematically to all categories, and then select the brands that are glyphosate residue free to be the ones that we put on the shelves, and take the other ones off because we shouldn't be eating them.
Totally and stop putting stuff on the shelf that has the oil separation, because I'm tired of stirring my nut butters.
100%. I do want to. I don't want to say defend the retailers for a little bit, but at least in my experience, these are the people I work with on a regular basis, and what I think is happening right now is people are starting to catch wind. Okay, regenerative is a thing; it's not going anywhere. We want to figure out how to support it. But where you mentioned like the systematical like implementation of like how do we support regen, the way buyers' performance is measured doesn't take that into consideration. So they're not looking necessarily to fulfill attributes on the shelf. They're focusing on, okay, like I need to hit my numbers. I need to have brands that are going to purchase X number of ads per year, who are going to promote quarterly, who are going to make sure that they're filling these individual buckets. So I just wanted to kind of like share that perspective that the buyers are kind of stuck. Maybe they really want to support it, but they're measuring in a way that if they're going to take somebody else off shelf who maybe has deeper pockets, is more, capitally funded, and who can provide that level of support, that's a really difficult ask for them to do. So I'm not making an excuse for them. I think that there's a way that they can be incentivized to bring.
It's an alignment and an incentives problem, right? Exactly. Just like we talked about with the production side, right?
Yeah, so it's a really complicated issue, and I do think that some of the retailers are making big progress. Like Sprouts that you mentioned is trying to focus on regen, natural grocers, Jimbo's. Erewhon's really great at bringing in regen, though they do have some very significant asks of new brands who get on shelf. But to your point, there are ways that they can improve the system, and I would love to see a regenerative brand in every category across the aisle. I think that's like a future that will likely be there in maybe 5 years. And we're just starting to kind of scratch the surface and like get consumers to demand the products. That's another big key part of this, is like if the customers don't know what it is yet, they can't buy it. And it's really confusing for customers right now, consumers who go into stores, because like there's rock certification, there's savory EOV. There are brands who don't have either certification who are pushing regen. So some use the Demeter certification. There's just a lot of like different ways to look at it, and it's relatively confusing. So as the movement starts to align and coalesce around a unified message, and we can share that message with the retailers and get kind of a mass adoption, I think that's really going to help us to move the needle.
Bravo.
Drop the mic, brother. I love it. I mean, somebody 100%. Should start a podcast with this guy. This guy's brilliant.
I selling food for a long time. I'm lucky to work with a bunch of really great people and get to understand how that side of the business operates.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nose. Absolutely. And again, it's about how do we align all of the virtues of this movement with the very real economic realities that we're all living within.
mm,
Right.
It's like I was naive when I started it. I thought, oh, dude, if I just make the best nut butter, me and my friends think it's the best. Like everyone
yeah.
wants it. They're trying to buy it. It's going to be the best selling almond butter in the world. And like,
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah, I think arguably we did make the most delicious, nutritious, ethical, and ecological nut butter that's currently out there on the market.
Hmm.
But guess what? It ain't the best selling.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
There's a price
there's a
barrier.
ton of reasons why that's true. But
Hmm.
the fact is that I am proud that we are in the top 12 best-selling almond butters in the natural channel nationwide, according to
Love
Spin
it.
data.
Hell yeah.
So that gives me hope. And the fact is, of those top 12 almond butter brands, we're one of only two that's actually growing.
Mm,
So that gives me hope. Is like,
that's
gosh,
huge.
it's been a slog to do what we've done, especially without adequate funding, without adequate team, blah blah blah. But we've made a lot of headway over 9 years, and with
Hmm.
with this funding coming in, getting the right team in place, getting the right infrastructure in place to actually do this thing well at scale,
Hmm.
um, I think it's going to just be a lot better moving forward for
Hmm.
achieving scaling our regenerative mission. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
stoked for what you're doing. I'm also almost like, and this is an arc that I feel Anthony might feel the same way. Tim, you probably feel the same way. Like you mentioned, I spend money on food, and unfortunately, like if I find a regenerative option in a category, I won't buy anybody else. So like my spend just continues to increase as my
Yeah.
awareness of these brands increases.
Yeah.
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 Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
That's
when I first tried Philosopher Foods, I bought the sample pack online, and I was like just trying everything. And then I just
mm,
found out Newport Market and Anthony and Ben sells
Yeah.
Philosopher Foods, and I
Yeah.
bought my first jar there.
nice.
And like my go-to afternoon snack, like apple and previously peanut butter. But I ate so much
Hmm.
that I developed an allergy.
Mm,
So, or maybe it wasn't an allergy, maybe it's a conventional way it's processed.
Hmm.
So now I'm just crushing Philosopher Foods, and I almost feel bad for how much I'm eating. I'm like, this is dollars, but it's so good. You can't not do it.
there's a lot of reasons to feel good about your addiction, Kyle, and you're
Yeah.
you're the perfect example of our consumer. Like once we
Yeah.
convert someone, they literally never go back, and we
Hmm.
have the stickiest, most loyal cult following that I can possibly imagine. So I'm super grateful for the people that get it and support us and consume our products. Thank you so much for your support. Um,
Dude, thanks for making the best.
dude,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do it any other way. And there's a lot of reasons to feel good about it, right? Almonds, it's a super healthy crop. I have
Mm.
another peer-reviewed study that it did this crazy like network analysis of 1,000 different variables and like 1,000 different foods, and it actually put almonds as like the number one most nutritionally fit food on the planet. They
Wow.
Wow.
according to this one study,
Wow.
and also almonds as a crop, it's one of the only nut-based tree crops that's actually carbon negative. And this
Mm.
is this was like a study that was done by Yale, um, and basically it's even with like all that degenerative stuff that we talked about, from a carbon perspective, it still is carbon negative, and that's largely
Wow.
because of the way that they well, first of all, it's a perennial crop, right? So
Right.
it's
Trees.
not
Right.
getting tilled and plowed under every year. But
Hmm.
more than that, it's all the hulls are used as dairy feed. So there's a
Mm.
lot of, and a lot of them are actually, some people use them for biochar as well. So there's a lot of other byproducts from the industry that contribute to making it carbon negative. And
Wow.
so I don't like people demonizing almonds because I don't think that they're looking at the whole picture. I think that
Hmm.
Right.
it's like any tool, it's how you wield it, right? It
Mm.
can be a planet destroying or a planet healing tool depending on your management and your processing.
Yep.
So yeah, the more that we can wield it in a way for the plant healing, the better, the more powerful this tool is going to be for all of us.
Well, I mean, we got to buy more Philosopher Foods so you can take over more acreage in California so we can start to implement more of these practices. And I mean, you
Exactly.
mentioned dairy is a huge industry in California. If we start to use those byproducts to feed the California dairy industry, I mean, there's just like this domino effect of positive outcomes if we can get
Hmm.
more people to support these types of brands. And I
Yeah.
am super pumped about it. I know Anthony is too. That's why we're here
Hmm.
doing this to talk about this stuff and to hopefully shed light and let people understand like the positive impact they can make by supporting brands who are doing the right thing.
The other thing I'll note briefly is that we are looking to get into some other categories. We're not
Ooh.
exactly sure like what it's going to be yet. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I kind of want to be data driven about it because
Mm-hmm.
I've been following my heart for 9 years and it's been really beautiful and it's gone well. But it's not like crushing it, right? We're not in
Mm-hmm.
3,000 retailers nationwide. We're not
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, $10 million brand yet. So I want to be strategic about choosing my next product to make sure that it's a category that's hot, it's a category that's fast moving, it's a category that's growing. Because you know a lot of the objections we get from CPG investors is around the
Mm-hmm.
nut butter category. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
"I'm sorry, the category is in decline. We're not interested. It's slow
Mm-hmm.
moving. It's a commodity category. We think you're too premium in a commodity
Mm-hmm.
category." I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, well, shoot, what was all that for? You know, like building, like investing
It's
9 years of my.
it's evolutions and stages though, bro.
Hmm.
Well, it's also, I mean, yeah, the pendulum swings, and I think right now there's probably the backlash against almonds right now because of all the negative press with water consumption. So you're fighting an extra uphill battle in that
Yeah,
category, trying to say that
totally.
like, hey, almonds are different, you know. So there's a lot of educational pieces you got to try to tick.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that that's a tough ask right now.
Mm-hmm. We got
Hmm.
to talk to Alec about some almond butter ice cream. Is what we need to do.
Ooh,
I feel
Totally.
like
yeah.
I feel like there are some ingredient and maybe even some food service plays for you too, Tim.
Yeah. No, I need to get into that game as well.
Hmm.
But that's
Just
that's
another thing for you to do with all by yourself and without proper funding. So like, just add it to your list, buddy.
I know,
Right.
I know.
Well, hey,
Yeah,
this
totally.
conversation's been incredibly stimulating. We're coming up close to time. I appreciate you. Hey, I don't know if you've got our outline or not, Tim, but somehow you touched on future outlook before we could even get there. So
Yeah.
that's some clairvoyance going on. But Anthony likes to ask this last question. So Anthony, go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, to wrap us up, Tim, we asked everybody, what do we need to do to have Regen Brands have 50% market share by 2050?
Um, I think in my mind, what we have to do is we have to quantify the value adds, not only on the farming end but on the nutritional end. And in fact, I
Mm,
think we've done a lot of good work on the farming end already. Groups like the Ecdysis Foundation, this What Your
mhm,
Food Ate book. There's thousands of studies, literally, that
mhm,
prove regenerative is the way. What
mhm,
we haven't done enough of, in my opinion, is the studying of the health benefits of regenerative farming on specifically nutrient density, and even what the heck does nutrient density mean? There's no scientific definition of nutrient density. And in
mhm,
fact, the scientific term for nutrient density or the study of nutrients in food and their compounds is called metabolomics. Look it up.
mhm,
Hmm.
It's
mhm,
studying the metabolic byproducts of food and the organisms that eat it. And so, when I look at the organic movement, I see what really moved the needle there was consumer health. They're like,
mhm.
I want to not
Chemical
get
free.
cancer. I don't want to get
Mhm,
cancer. I want to thrive. And
mhm,
so similarly, we need to start quantifying what it means to thrive and what are the nutrients that we need to thrive and how much
mhm,
more of those nutrients are there in our regeneratively grown food than the other types of food out there.
mhm.
Because like I said, the nutrition facts label, it has what you need to survive, right? That's it.
Yeah,
Only
yeah.
survive. It doesn't tell you any of the elements that need to thrive. There's all these phytochemicals that we absolutely need in our diet to make food truly medicine. And those
Mhm,
elements are lacking because of conventional agriculture, hands down. And
mhm,
you can scientifically prove it. David Montgomery has done that. And so but we need to tell the story of the end result. Like, man, this food is so much more delicious, so much more nutritious, and here is how. Quantify it scientifically,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And let people know that. And the more that they realize that and can see the A/B differences,
mhm,
so you can taste it, right? A/B and deliciousness, but to
mhm,
actually quantify it nutritionally, scientifically, uh, that in my view is how we're going to get there. Otherwise,
mhm.
it's going to be really uphill battle to make the economic argument to spend more for like this nicer looking, nicer feeling farm. You
Yep.
got to make it personal. You got to make it visceral, right?
Mhm,
How does it and also, yeah, getting people to understand that you are more than this isolated entity. When you eat food,
mm,
you're not eating just for your organs and your brain and you as this like
mm,
separate entity as an individual. You're
mhm,
actually, if you look it up, you're a holobiont, right? You're not,
mm.
you're a community, you're a host of so many different communities of organisms. And so when you're eating, you need to think about what else you're feeding besides yourself, and it's
Mm,
trillions of microorganisms, and they have
mhm,
needs for thriving, like not eating glyphosate because that harms
mhm.
them.
Yeah.
Right.
I love how much data you've brought to this conversation, man. So
Thanks.
I think you taking that into the product expansion efforts is going to serve you well, because this is the most, I think, concrete, quantifiable data and just references and things we've had in any conversation. So I commend you for that, and I couldn't agree more that, you know, there's even some really compelling misinformation data out there supporting fake meat, conventional ag, some other things that I think, the sayings like men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. Sometimes they do lie, but
Mm-hmm.
the more critical mass we give to them, the more validity, and the more we prove them out, and the bigger the sample size, the stronger those quants all become.
Absolutely. And we got to be careful because, like Jonathan Lundgren, he got canned by the USDA for consistently telling the scientific truth about why conventional is not good and why regenerative is better. They canned him. They silenced him. And so he's like, I'm out, dude. I'm going to go do my
He's
own
the man.
thing. Yeah. He's a real whistleblower hero. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, I'm a philosopher, and so I don't know the science myself, but I know why we need to partner with the scientists to get this data. And it just blows my mind as a philosopher that we can know so much about distant galaxies. We can know so much about the subatomic particles. Why don't we know everything that there is to know about the thing that allows us to thrive on this planet? Why aren't we being scientific about our food?
So true.
So I want nutrient labels in the future to actually tell you about what's inside your jar, right? Right now, this is telling me averages of like, oh yeah, almonds across the U.S. are typically having this much protein, this much. This is not an analysis of my product. So this label actually means nothing. It doesn't correspond to the sauce in here. So I'm going to start paying the money that it takes once I get funded to quantify what's actually in here and how it affects what's in here.
Love it. Well, and at the same time, not just what's in there, but what's not in there.
Exactly.
I think it's an interesting concept to say, this is what's not in my food, which I think we're getting to with non-GMO and glyphosate residue free. But I think that movement will continue to proliferaate. But hey, we're officially over time. I think we could all sit here and talk for hours. I can't wait for the moment we're in the same room and we can just like go nuts and eat a ton of almond butter. But this has been super
unreal
conversation.
Dude.
Yeah. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining. And yeah, man, everybody check out Philosopher Foods when you get a chance.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Yeah, keep up your great work, you regenerates.
Appreciate it, man.
For show notes and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, ReGen-Brands.com. That is ReGen-Brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, ReGen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes. Thanks so much for tuning into the ReGen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the ReGen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.